Space, in its infinite audacity, had decided that Station Kepler 442 would be the perfect place to conduct an experiment in cosmic irony. The research outpost hung in the gravitational sweet spot between a dying red giant and its considerably more stable binary companion, a positioning that, according to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Required the kind of mathematical precision that made astrophysicists weep with joy and engineers weep with exhaustion. The station itself resembled a mechanical snowflake, 6 arms extending from a central hub, each one bristling with sensors that could detect a neutrino's bad mood from 3 light-years away. Inside this marvel of collaborative engineering, representing 17 different species and 4 competing philosophical approaches to quantum mechanics, 93 sentient beings slept like the dead, which, given the nature of their current research subject, seemed either deeply appropriate or catastrophically ironic, depending on your perspective regarding cosmic humor. The Vrin occupied the largest section, their bulbous bodies arranged in climate-controlled pods that maintained the precise humidity their respiratory sacs required. 12 of them, senior astrophysicists all, lay in suspension that wasn't quite hibernation, but certainly wasn't consciousness either. Their species had evolved on a world where the primary survival strategy involved becoming extremely uninteresting to predators for extended periods. Millions of years of refinement had produced a people who could slow their metabolic processes to near stasis, while their considerable intellects continued processing data in the background. Convenient for long-term space observation. Less convenient when something actually required immediate attention. The Korth delegation, 7 individuals whose crystalline structures refracted the station's ambient lighting into prismatic displays, had synchronized their rest cycles with mechanical precision. Their homeworld orbited a star with a rotational period of approximately 4 standard hours, which had gifted them with phenomenal data processing abilities and absolutely ruined their capacity for anything resembling a normal sleep schedule by anyone else's standards. They compensated by sleeping in shifts so precisely coordinated that their collective consciousness never fully disconnected from the station's sensor arrays. In theory. In practice, they dreamed in mathematics and occasionally woke up convinced they'd solved problems that didn't actually exist. 41 Tessic researchers occupied the botanical wing, their small frames nested in what looked disturbingly like oversized flower pots filled with nutrient-rich soil. Their evolutionary path had diverged from motel life so long ago that their current form represented what happened when plants decided intelligence was a useful survival trait, but mobility was probably overrated. They conducted their observations through biochemical analysis, converting stellar radiation data into compounds they could literally taste. Right now, they tasted nothing. Their root systems dormant, their photosynthetic patches covered by protective sheeting that blocked the harsh radiation bleeding through the station's reinforced viewports. The Kix contingent, 17 individuals whose segmented bodies and compound visual systems had initially terrified the early human ambassadors until everyone realized they were essentially harmless academics who just happened to look like nightmare fuel, had webbed themselves into the observation deck support structures. Their species had evolved in zero-gravity environments within their system's asteroid belt, and they found artificial gravity profoundly uncomfortable. They slept by shutting down different neural clusters in sequence, maintaining just enough awareness to avoid drifting, but not enough to actually process anything happening around them. 15 Orlith, mammalian creatures whose thick fur and redundant organs made them nearly indestructible, had piled together in what could only be described as a professional cuddle puddle in the crew quarters. Their homeworld had seasons that lasted decades, and they'd adapted by developing the ability to sleep through pretty much anything. Volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, dramatic shifts in atmospheric composition, They'd snooze right through it all and wake up when conditions improved, evolutionarily confident that whatever was happening would either kill them instantly or could wait until they'd gotten proper rest. And then there was the human. One. Singular. Solo. The only member of their species assigned to this particular venture, which should have been everyone's first clue that humanity's approach to cosmic research differed fundamentally from the galactic norm. The technician moved through the station's corridors with a peculiar gait that came from spending 6 months in variable gravity. The lighting strips tracked the movement automatically, illuminating sections ahead while dimming behind, creating a traveling bubble of visibility through the otherwise darkened station. Most of the life support systems had been dialed down to minimal levels, conserving energy for the sensor arrays that were the station's actual purpose. The human's name didn't matter to the story. What mattered was the behavior, the pattern, the distinctly human approach to a situation that every other species on the station had agreed required minimal conscious observation. The research project had been designed around automated systems that could collect stellar data continuously, while the crew rested through the boring parts. The dying star they orbited wasn't expected to do anything interesting for at least another 4 months, at which point it would enter a phase of irregular pulsation that would provide exactly the data. 17 different scientific institutions were desperately eager to analyze. Until then, the plan was simple. Sleep. Rest. Conserve resources. Let the computers do what computers did best, which was stare at the same thing for months without getting bored or needing bathroom breaks. Every species on the station had agreed this was the logical approach. Every species except humanity, apparently, because while 93 sentient beings slumbered in their various states of reduced consciousness, the human prowled the corridors like some kind of caffeinated ghost, checking readouts that didn't need checking, performing maintenance on systems that weren't malfunctioning, and generally behaving as though sleep was a suggestion rather than a biological necessity. The technician paused at a sensor junction, pulling up holographic displays that flickered in the dim light. Data streamed past in formats designed for 6 different visual systems, which meant the human had to translate everything through multiple filters just to make sense of the raw numbers. This didn't seem to bother them. They'd been doing it for months now, their pattern recognition systems adapting to alien data architecture with the kind of stubborn flexibility that had characterized their species since they'd first looked at indigestible plants and decided cooking might help. Outside the viewports, the red giant pulsed with the slow rhythm of stellar senescence. Its outer layers had expanded past the orbit of what had once been 3 planets, now reduced to streamers of vaporized rock, adding trace elements to the star's atmosphere. Beautiful, in the way that catastrophic destruction often was when viewed from a safe distance. The kind of beauty that required sophisticated instruments to appreciate fully, since unshielded exposure to the radiation levels this close would turn biological matter into something resembling overcooked protein in under 30 seconds. The human made a notation on their personal datapad, something about fluctuations in the star's magnetic field that probably meant nothing but might mean something if they looked at the data from 17 different angles over the next 3 weeks. This was the nature of astrophysical research. 99% boredom, 1% pants-wetting terror when you realized the thing you'd been casually observing was about to do something spectacular and possibly lethal. The technician moved on, checking the next junction, then the next, working through a maintenance routine that was equal parts necessary procedure and nervous habit. The station hummed around them, life support systems maintaining habitable conditions for species that required everything from near-freezing temperatures to atmospheric pressure that would crush an unprotected human like a tin can under a hydraulic press. Somewhere in the botanical wing, a Tessic's root system twitched in response to a trace chemical signal, but didn't wake. In the crew quarters, an Orlith rolled over in sleep, their dreams presumably involving the kind of prey animals that had been extinct on their homeworld for 10,000 years. The quartz crystals dimmed fractionally as their collective processing power dipped during a particularly deep phase of their synchronized rest cycle. And the human kept walking, kept checking, kept watching, displaying the kind of paranoid vigilance that had served their species remarkably well during their relatively brief existence in the galaxy. Where other species had evolved sophisticated methods of not noticing danger until it was absolutely necessary, humanity had apparently decided that constant, low-level anxiety was a perfectly reasonable way to approach the universe. The irony, which the cosmos seemed to appreciate, even if nobody currently conscious was around to notice it, was that this particular behavioral quirk was about to prove extremely relevant. Because while the automated systems were very good at detecting the kinds of stellar events they'd been programmed to detect, they were considerably less effective at noticing when the star decided to do something completely unprecedented. The red giant pulsed again, this time with a rhythm that was wrong in ways the sensors weren't quite equipped to measure. The human, 3 corridors away from the nearest monitoring station, paused mid-step. Something had changed. Nothing obvious. Nothing the sleeping crew would have noticed even if they'd been awake. Just a subtle shift in the background hum of the station, a fractional variation in the way the deck plates vibrated, the kind of detail that required paying attention to things nobody had any logical reason to pay attention to. The technician's posture shifted, shoulders tensing, head tilting in that peculiarly human gesture that indicated the pattern recognition software running on their biological hardware had flagged something as potentially significant. In the crew quarters, an Orleth's ear twitched. In the observation deck, a Kix's compound eyes flickered behind closed membranes. In the climate-controlled pods, a Vrin's respiratory sac expanded slightly, pulling in just a bit more oxygen than their resting state required. 93 sleeping researchers remained asleep. The alarms hadn't triggered. The automated systems reported nominal conditions. There was absolutely no logical reason for concern. But the human was moving differently now, purpose replacing routine. And somewhere deep in the evolutionary programming of every prey species on the station, ancient instincts began doing the mental equivalent of opening one eye and asking what the hell was going on. The thing about evolving as prey, which roughly 87% of spacefaring species had the dubious honor of experiencing, was that it made you really, really good at not being noticed. Natural selection had spent millions of years rewarding the individuals who could hold still, blend in, and generally avoid drawing the attention of anything with more teeth than good intentions. This produced species with remarkable camouflage abilities, sophisticated threat assessment protocols, and an almost supernatural capacity for remaining calm during emergencies. It also meant they slept through absolutely everything that didn't immediately involve being eaten. Station Kepler 442 had experienced, by the human technicians' count, 47 distinct alarm events in the past 6 months. Micrometeorite impacts, radiation spikes, power fluctuations, coolant leaks, sensor malfunctions, data processing errors that caused 3 different systems to simultaneously declare the star was about to explode, implode, and spontaneously transform into a black hole made entirely of administrative paperwork. The sleeping crew had responded to exactly 0 of these emergencies. Not because they were negligent or professionally incompetent, but because their finely tuned survival instincts had correctly assessed that none of these situations involved immediate predation. The station's automated systems would handle the problem, or they wouldn't. And either way, waking up wouldn't significantly improve anyone's survival odds. So they slept, their unconscious minds performing the evolutionary calculus that had kept their ancestors alive through countless generations. The human, meanwhile, had responded to all 47 alarms with varying degrees of panic and caffeinated problem-solving, which said something deeply unflattering about humanity's risk assessment capabilities, or something deeply concerning about their inability to relax, depending on who you asked. The biological difference was straightforward enough. Prey species evolved to minimize energy expenditure and avoid detection. Predator species evolved to notice absolutely everything, because that flicker of movement might be dinner, and that unusual sound might be a competitor trying to steal said dinner. Humanity hadn't evolved as apex predators exactly, but they'd spent enough time in the middle of the food chain to develop the kind of paranoid awareness that came from never being quite sure whether you were hunting or being hunted. This manifested in peculiar ways, like noticing when background radiation levels shifted by fractions of a percent, or detecting subtle changes in the station's structural vibrations that indicated nothing the sensors considered alarm-worthy but might suggest something interesting was happening. Or in this particular case, recognizing that the red giant outside had just done something that fell outside the predicted parameters in ways too subtle for automated systems to flag, but too significant for a nervous ape descendant to ignore. The technician was now moving with intent, not panic, but definitely not the casual maintenance stroll from 10 minutes ago. Corridors passed quickly, the lighting system struggling to keep up with the increased pace. Destination: main observation deck, where the primary sensor controls waited along with enough redundant monitoring systems to satisfy even humanity's paranoid standards. The human broke into a run. Not a sprint, not the kind of panicked scrambling that suggested imminent doom, but a purposeful acceleration that spoke of someone who'd seen something concerning and decided that getting to the observation deck 3 minutes faster might actually matter. Boots hit deck plates with rhythmic precision, the sound echoing through corridors designed to dampen noise pollution. The lighting strips flared brighter, responding to the increased movement, casting sharp shadows that stretched and contracted with each stride. In the crew quarters, an Orlith's eyes snapped open, not gradually, not with the slow confusion of someone waking naturally from deep sleep. Instantly, completely. The kind of awakening that happened when every ancient instinct simultaneously screamed that something with forward-facing eyes was moving with purpose, and you needed to be conscious right now. 3 more Orlith woke within seconds, their collective unconscious registering the same primal alarm. Something was hunting. The pattern of footfalls, the rhythm, the determination behind each step triggered recognition software written in genetic code millions of years before their species had discovered fire. This wasn't maintenance walking. This wasn't casual movement. This was predator locomotion, and every nerve ending they possessed wanted them aware and ready to make decisions about survival. In the observation deck, a Kix detached from the support structure, compound eyes fully active before their conscious mind had even processed why they were awake. Another followed, then 2 more. Their segmented bodies moved with the jerky efficiency of beings whose ancestors had learned that hesitation in the presence of danger was just natural selection, taking the scenic route. The Vryn emerged from their metabolic suspension like swimmers breaching the surface after too long underwater. Respiratory sacs inflated rapidly, drawing in oxygen their suddenly racing metabolisms demanded. Confusion mixed with adrenaline analogs, because nothing in their monitoring systems indicated a crisis, but something in the air, some chemical trace or vibration pattern, told them that staying asleep was suddenly a spectacularly bad idea. The Tessic root systems contracted, pulling their consciousness back from the deep soil dreams they'd been enjoying. Several of them would later report tasting danger, which made absolutely no sense from a biochemical standpoint, but perfect sense from an evolutionary one. Danger had a flavor, apparently, and it tasted like a human moving fast through a space station that should have been quiet. The Korth crystals blazed with sudden luminescence as their collective consciousness snapped back to full awareness, their mathematical dreams fragmenting into sharp-edged reality. Calculations ran through their networked minds at speeds that would have caused organic brains to overheat, trying to determine what threat could possibly justify this kind of abrupt awakening. 93 researchers, representing species that had collectively spent billions of years perfecting the art of sleeping through everything non-lethal, were suddenly, irrevocably, absolutely awake. And not one of them could articulate exactly why, beyond the bone-deep certainty that something was wrong in ways their conscious minds hadn't caught up to yet, but their unconscious programming understood perfectly. The human, blissfully unaware of the chaos their purposeful stride had triggered, reached the observation deck and immediately began pulling up sensor data. Hands moved across holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency, isolating readings, comparing current values against historical baselines, looking for the thing their instincts had noticed, but their conscious mind hadn't quite identified yet. Behind them, the first of the awakened crew members appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, eyes wide, looking for the threat that absolutely had to be there because otherwise, why would the apex predator be moving like that? The red giant pulsed again, and this time, the sensors noticed too. Alarms began their belated shrieking just as the human's fingers stopped moving, frozen above a data readout that showed exactly what their subconscious had detected 5 minutes ago. The star was collapsing. Not in 4 months. Not according to schedule. Right now, in real time. With the kind of catastrophic speed that suggested their models had been optimistically wrong about several fundamental assumptions regarding stellar death mechanics. The observation deck had transformed into controlled chaos within 30 seconds of the alarms finally catching up to reality. 93 researchers, most of whom had been enjoying perfectly good dreams, now crowded around displays showing data that made several of them wish they'd stayed asleep. The red giant was undergoing core collapse at a rate that violated approximately 6 different models of stellar evolution. The timeline had moved from 4 months to roughly 18 hours, which was the difference between having time to compose thoughtful research papers and having time to compose frantic goodbye messages. The human stood at the central console, hands moving across interfaces, already 3 steps ahead in the evacuation calculation. Trajectory plotted, engine warm-up initiated, emergency power routing configured. The kind of rapid-fire decision-making that came from a species that had survived by noticing when it was time to run. A senior VRIN researcher, respiratory sacs still working overtime, managed to form words. "How long have you known?" The technician didn't look up. "About 6 minutes, maybe 7. The alarms triggered 2 minutes ago." A quartz crystalline structure flickered with processing overflow. "You detected this 4 minutes before our sensor arrays. Your sensor arrays were looking for the scheduled collapse. This isn't that. Different magnetic signature. Different gravitational wave pattern. Subtle enough that the automated systems figured it was background noise until it wasn't." The human's fingers paused, then resumed. "I just noticed the background noise didn't sound right." An Orlith, still visibly shaking from adrenaline surge, stared at the human with mixed respect and existential horror. "You noticed wrong-sounding background noise from a stellar collapse 4 light minutes away." "Technically, I noticed the station's response. Vibration patterns in the deck plates. You get used to how things feel when they're normal, then you notice when they're not." The evacuation procedures continued with organized efficiency. The station's engines began the careful ballet of extracting them from their gravitational anchor point. Slowly, carefully, because rushing would destabilize their trajectory. A Tessic researcher asked the question others were thinking. "Why did we all wake up before the alarms?" Silence filled the observation deck. 93 researchers, each with multiple advanced degrees, looked at each other with dawning realization that they'd all experienced the same phenomenon, and none of them had a rational explanation. The human, still focused on navigation, offered an answer without being asked. "Probably heard me running. Sound travels through the station pretty well when most systems are in low power mode. We sleep through alarms specifically designed to wake us." The Korth's voice carried crystalline precision. "We've slept through micrometeorite impacts, radiation warnings, catastrophic system failures. But we wake up because you started jogging?" The technician finally looked up. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe you were all in light sleep cycles. Lots of possible explanations that don't involve my footsteps being somehow more alarming than actual alarms. And Orlith, who'd spent 3 decades studying interspecies psychology, wasn't buying it. Your footsteps changed rhythm, changed from maintenance walking to purpose walking. And every prey species on this station immediately woke up because our evolutionary programming recognized predator movement patterns. The human's expression suggested this was exactly the conversation they'd been hoping to avoid. That seems like a reach. Is it? The Orlith gestured around the deck. We spent 6 months sleeping through everything this station could throw at us. But the moment you detected something those systems missed and started moving like it mattered, we woke up. All of us. Instantly. A Kix researcher added their observation. You weren't even moving toward us. You were 3 corridors away. But we woke anyway, because somewhere in our evolutionary programming, there's a subroutine that says, when the apex predator gets nervous, everyone else better figure out why. The human returned attention to navigation. We're not apex predators. We spent most of our evolutionary history being eaten by things with more teeth and fewer existential questions. And yet, the Vryn researcher said softly, you're the only one who noticed the star was dying early. You're the only one who stayed awake for 6 months. You're the only one whose movement patterns apparently trigger every prey species alarm system in this quadrant of space. The station cleared the critical gravitational threshold. On displays, the red giant continued its collapse, photosphere fragmenting in ways that would provide fascinating data for anyone who survived to analyze it. So, what you're saying, the technician finally responded, is that humanity's reputation in the galactic community as the species that makes everyone vaguely nervous isn't just prejudice. It's because we literally trigger prey species panic responses just by walking purposefully through hallways. That's exactly what we're saying, confirmed the Orlith. Great. Really looking forward to putting that in my mission report. The human paused. Though I suppose it explains why, every time I show up to interdepartmental meetings, people suddenly remember they have urgent business elsewhere. A junior Tessic offered an observation. On the positive side, we now know that keeping humans awake on research stations is an excellent early warning system. Better than our sensors, apparently. We should write a paper. Please don't write a paper, the human said immediately. 3 researchers were already making notes. The paper was definitely happening. 4 weeks later, after they'd reached a monitoring station at safe distance, the senior Vryn researcher published a preliminary report. It contained detailed analysis of the stellar collapse and a single footnote that would become infamous in academic circles across 17 systems. The footnote read, emergency detection protocols have been updated to include monitoring of human crew member movement patterns. When the apex predators get nervous, so should you. The human technician, reading the report in their quarters, groaned loud enough to wake up 2 Orlith researchers 3 compartments away. They immediately panicked before realizing the human was just expressing frustration with academic papers. Somewhere in the cold mathematics of the universe, cosmic irony added another tally mark to its collection of jokes at humanity's expense. They'd sent their species to the stars, hoping to prove they belonged among the great civilizations. Instead, they'd discovered their primary contribution to interspecies cooperation was making everyone else nervous enough to pay attention when something was actually wrong. Not through sophisticated technology or advanced warning systems, but simply by walking slightly faster down a hallway while their subconscious processed danger signals too subtle for anyone else to notice. The technician looked at the report again, at the footnote that was absolutely going to follow them for the rest of their career, and decided that maybe cosmic irony had a point. Humanity had spent millennia being the species that noticed when the wind changed, when something in their environment shifted in ways that meant danger. Turns out that particular skill set translated pretty well to space. even if it did make everyone else jumpy. The human deleted the strongly worded response they'd been composing, replaced it with a brief acknowledgement that the footnote was accurate if deeply embarrassing, and finally, 6 months after the mission began, decided maybe it was time to get some actual sleep. 3 corridors away, an Orlith's ear twitched, registered that the human was settling down rather than moving with purpose, and relaxed back into unconsciousness. The cubs could sleep now. The apex predator was resting, which meant the immediate universe was probably safe. Probably.